way, but like I said, I want to respect your all's time. You got here on time, and I'm going to start on time, almost. My name's Joe Abel. I am the Deputy County Manager for Seminole County, former Leisure Services Director, so I was part of the process that we went through at Deer Run. I know we're asking you to wear a mask. I'm taking mine off. I'm going to keep some distance from you, but I can't breathe and talk at the same time. So I would prefer to be able to breathe. Talking is optional. Although by the time I'm done, you'll think I won't shut up. We have a couple guests with us this evening that I want to introduce right up the front here. Commissioner Jay Zimbauer. I'm sure you guys are aware of who he is. And your district commissioner here for this area, Bob DeLaurie. If I stop in the middle of a sentence or a word, it's because I'm taking a breath. I'm just coming off COVID, so I'm keeping my distance from everyone. But sometimes my breathing's not where it's supposed to be, so it's a labor of survival here a little bit. So fortunately, we have somebody doing the presentation other than me, but he's out there in cyberspace. His name is Rick Durr, and he is our Director of Leisure Services, who used to be my division manager, who, as we all know, did all the work. So why would I change anything tonight? So we're going to let him do all the work again tonight. Anthony from the city of Castleberry, I think you're here if you want to raise your hand. So we have a representative from the city of Castleberry. Thanks for coming out. So what we're going to try to do tonight is we're going to try to take some questions, but we're probably going to take as many as reasonable in the amount of time that we have here. We've given opportunities to get your feedback and to get your questions and to be able to answer those questions as we move forward over the next several months. So it's not like if we don't get to the questions tonight that you're not allowed to ask them or that you won't be able to ask them. Our intent this evening is to talk about what could be and how we're going about this. So we're being very methodical, very much like we did with Rolling Hills. First of all, let me back up a little bit. These two gentlemen are here, but they're not going to speak tonight because I think we have another couple commissioners that are on the Zoom. And because this item will come before them at the board meeting, and we did not advertise this as a sunshine meeting for public input from these guys, so don't think they're being quiet is in any indication of what their thoughts are. And if you know them like I do, it will be odd for him to be sitting here and being quiet. But that's why I wanted to say that, so you would understand. That'll cost me at some point. That'll cost me. So what we're trying to do is we're methodically going through what we call a due diligence period. And Rick will go over all these details in his presentation. But I want to kind of set the stage here a little bit so that we're not setting unrealistic expectations out of the gate tonight or moving forward, because this is truly a due diligence period for us to look at this golf course to see if it makes sense for the county to come in and buy this and develop it into a park. There's a lot that goes into that. And again, Rick will touch on some of it. Rick will touch on a lot of it as he goes through his presentation, but there's a lot of parts and pieces that we went through with Rolling Hills. There's a lot of parts and pieces that we'll go through here. And when I say parts and pieces, just our due diligence, property appraisals, of what's called a phase 1 environmental. We've already started pulling geological information that we can find or floodplain information that we can find. And again, Rick will go through that. I promised him I wouldn't steal his thunder, but clearly I am. But what I want you to understand is this golf course property at Deer Run is a different scenario than Rolling Hills. And Rick's going to talk about it a little bit, but I wanted to kind of preface his conversation because Rolling Hills came about at a time when we were trying to figure out what we were going to do with the property at Jetta Point. We were working with the state to figure out what we could do. What they wanted us to do, what we wanted to do, what the community wanted to do was not the same thing. And since we work for the community here locally. We were going to honor what the community wanted and not what the state wanted. State fought tooth and nail because they didn't want to move the restrictions off of Jetta Point onto a new property. And that in itself took a life of its own. We fought the state, we won. And luckily we were able to move that forward, and we're able to move the restrictions off of the Jetta Point property to Rolling Hills and develop that as a passive park moving forward, with some elements that are appropriate for that particular site. Similar situation, but not the same. This is basically an opportunity for us to look at an alternative to development on a piece of property that is no longer functioning as it was intended to be, which was a golf course. There's going to be opportunities on this piece of property that are different than what the opportunities at Rolling Hills has been and will be. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And I'm going to shut up now and turn it over to Rick. Rick is out there in cyberspace. He's got a presentation all teed up and ready to go. So I'm going to sit down and shut up. Rick, it's yours.
Are you there?
Yes, sir.
All
Yeah,
right,
I
just
can hear
making
you.
sure.
We're good.
I've never been a disembodied voice before, so this is a new one for me. First off, thanks to everyone who is there, present in the building with you, as well as the 368 people and counting online that have logged in and are watching this via Zoom right now. Obviously, this is under slightly different conditions, or else we'd all be together. And certainly making a presentation to you all and being able to see your faces and your reactions certainly help. It certainly makes the jokes go over a little bit better. But I wanted to jump right in as we go forward. So Joe's already handled number one. This is our agenda for this evening. Fantastic. We can move on and we'll go straight to number two. We'll talk about why we're here. Joe mentioned a little bit about that. We'll talk about the property itself and the things that we're looking at from a staff perspective. We'll talk a little bit about Rolling Hills, which Joe has already introduced. We'll talk a little bit more about number four, your potential role in this process of ways that you can help contribute, not just tonight, but from beyond tonight. So the bottom line is the reason why we're here is because of you. If it wasn't for your work last year in working among the community and among your neighbors and getting with your county commissioners to talk about how can the county take a look at the property itself, and is this something that the county might be interested in going forward. So towards the end of last year, staff had put together at the request of the Board of County Commissioners a process that we can follow that followed a little bit, very much like, the Rolling Hills process, but it had some expectations, and it also had some things such as dollars and time frames, and we'll get into that in just a moment. But at least to be able to outline, this is what the process would look like going forward. As Joe had mentioned with Rolling Hills, that took several years. Well, we don't have several years here in this particular process, so we looked at speeding this up quite a bit. So the slide that you're seeing right now is of the schedule. This is starting January 1. Late last year, the county started discussions with the current property owner, and the current property owner agreed to take their development plans and basically put them in abeyance, meaning that they pressed the pause button in their process to allow the county to work with you and to look at the property and go through our due diligence to decide whether or not this is something the county could do going forward. As Joe had already said, and I'll mention it here, the county has not purchased, we've had some questions come in already, the county has not purchased the property. We have, however, come to an agreement with the property owner to go ahead and pause his plans for the first 6 months of this year so that we can go ahead and move forward. So this schedule right here is it basically the February 9th meeting, as it shows on the screen, is exactly where we're at. So we're right at the beginning of this process. And then we'll talk about the different steps as we go forward. Basically, what we wanted to do was get you all together so that we're all talking the same language. We're all speaking the same language. And from this point forward, we can all be on the same page with the process, with the terminology that's being used, as well as what you can expect during this process and when we'll be going back to the Board of County Commissioners. Now, our expectation is by February 23rd to update the board on the meeting that we had here, as well as a survey that will give you the address for as we proceed with the presentation. And you'll have additional opportunities to provide input to basically update the board and allow them to say, let's continue on, or if there's other thoughts or other information, we can discuss that as well. Because once that happens, that's when I'll call it the real work starts. And all of these steps need to be handled through the due diligence process. Everything from looking at an MSBU, and we'll talk about that in a moment, to property appraisals, phase 1 environmental, phase 2 environmental studies, you name it, making sure that we're doing our full due diligence before any kind of decision needs to be made by the board as to whether or not we can proceed. And right now, our target is to be able to come back to the board on June the 22nd to have them make a decision on, are we moving forward or not? But by then we will know all the answers to a lot of these questions as we proceed forward. So as we move forward in the presentation, let's start taking a look at the property in regards in the greater context of Seminole County. This is a list of 14 golf courses that have existed in Seminole County. The top 6 are currently all in private ownership and are operating today. The middle 3 that you see on your list are properties that were purchased by some of our municipal neighbors. So the city of Castleberry, Sanford, and Oviedo had purchased these particular golf courses, and they're currently run as municipal golf courses. The 5 on the bottom are all courses that closed at various times since 2005, all the way up to Deer Run back in 2019. And again, I wanted to show you this list saying that we've talked about over and over again that we don't necessarily want to have to deal with every single golf course that comes through the pipeline. That's been said publicly many times. But in regards to special instances like Rolling Hills, and we'll talk more about that in a second, and this particular golf course, that's what we're looking at right now. So just understanding in the larger context of things, we've got a lot of golf going on, and we've got a lot of golf that's closed. So those are some of the issues that we've been dealing with. So this is a planned photograph, an aerial of Rolling Hills back in 2015. That was a course that closed in June of 2014. If you're not familiar with the location, the slide on the left-hand side is I-4 and the intersection of I-4 and State Road 434. So it's about 7 or 8 miles due west of you right now. Rolling Hills is a very long linear course that closed down then. As Joe had mentioned, we had a grant on the Jetta Point property to develop it as a park. And the Board of County Commissioners listened to the residents of Seminole County and put those plans on hold. But we had a state grant and we needed to find a way to move it to another location. It went basically that we were able to find a suitable location at Rolling Hills after we looked at a number of other properties. And after working with the state for, I believe it was about 2 years or so, we were able to iron out all the details on how that would work. And by 2018, we were able to purchase the property. Since we purchased the property in August of 2018, the county has begun to maintain the property as of that date. We continue to maintain it as it is one of our parks, even though it's technically not open. We went through last summer a master planning exercise to where the board was able to approve a phase 1 development. We'll talk about what that is as we get into this presentation. As well as we were able to do some nice pictures and some visioning about what that might look like. So this might be the center of the park as we continue to move forward. And we were able to produce our longer term vision. Because as with Rolling Hills, the Deer Run property that we're looking at this in phases in terms of park development. And we'll do so because it's more fiscally responsible that way to take this in smaller chunks and smaller bites. And we're able to implement that at least a little bit faster by doing it that way. So just like this in Rolling Hills, we were able to come up with a future vision. And that's a similar type of process that we're looking at here. So that was Rolling Hills. So let's now start taking a look at how we would apply that process to the Deer Run property. The aerial that hopefully you see on your screen that says 2019 at the bottom, this I believe was taken just a few months before the golf course actually shut down. You see Red Bug Lake Road down the bottom of the screen, north is to the top, and then you see some of the local lakes, Red Bug Lake, Crystal Bowl, and so forth. So one of the things that we do is we go back as far as we possibly can before development happened to take a look at what the property may have been. And that helps us to do things as we move forward in planning the park. The aerial that's hopefully on your screen again is taken from 1940. And one of the things that I wanted to point out, the red line is sort of the approximate location of the golf course boundary today. On the east side of that, or the right side of that boundary, you'll see all this dark color in there. We believe that's a former wetland system that was probably on the property for years and years and decades, long before any homes were developed around here. And that could start to give us clues into the hydrology of the property, as well as geologic issues with the property and all of the things that we'll be looking at as we go forward, including park development. So as the slides continue, by 1957, you see sort of a series of lines into what used to be the wetlands over there. It looks like they've been drained. As we head forward into time, you start to see some clearing happening on the left side of your screen as development in the city of Castleberry starts to work its way to the east. By 1972, you see some development happening on the left side of your screen.
Hey, Rick,
just north of Dewdrop Pool.
Rick, just to interrupt you for a second, some of your slides are a little bit delayed. So you're at 1972 now, but you were about 10 seconds behind.
Okay. So by 1980, which will be the next slide, you start to see Sterling Park taking shape. Again, Redbug Lake Road is across the bottom. Not a lot going on down there. And as development continued, especially in the 80s, you start to see Deer Run developing around the golf course. And by about the mid 90s to 2019, pretty much Deer Run reached build out, as well as a lot of the properties out on Redbug Lake Road. That gives us at least a snapshot in time of understanding how the property developed, not just the golf course, but the home sites around it, and taking a look at how that happened and understanding the age of the property, access issues, all the way down to, again, how the drainage on the site may have worked prior to development as we go forward in time. So the things that we've been looking at as we move forward since about I want to say is about October of last year, was we gathered up all the information that we possibly could find on the property already. That included some of the maps that we have in-house. You saw some of the historical aerials and the research that we've done there. We've also were able to collect the information that was brought forward to the county for review by the existing property owner. So everything from existing easements and utility maps to looking at background traffic studies, environmental analysis. We've had access to that information, and we've obviously been able to read it and study it going forward. As we continue to move forward in discussing this and analyzing this in terms of its park use, there's a lot of other factors that we'll look at, including just the general surrounding context. We've heard some questions already that says, if this is a park, how will my neighbors access the property? And really getting nailing down the details on understanding the use of the property, the access from neighborhoods and so forth will help us as we move forward during the planning and design stage, all the way down to really understanding the utility situation, both above ground and underground. So I'll flip through these hopefully kind of quickly as we move forward, but out on December 11th of last year, we were able to take a tour of the property, both inside and outside the facilities, as well as drive the golf course and try to get a lay of the land and understand at least what it is we're looking at on the surface, as well as under the surface, if we can get some hints while we're doing that. So we looked at inside and outside the clubhouse. Good news on the clubhouse is that it is nowhere near in as condition that we saw with Rolling Hills. The Rolling Hills Golf Clubhouse, if you don't know, the county knocked it down in the middle of, I want to say 2019, late 2019. It was beyond salvageable use, and the Board of County Commissioners had decided after some analysis that it would be about the same cost to go ahead and build new on the site. So we've since removed the clubhouse. In addition to that, we looked inside and outside the maintenance yard, trying to understand what we've got going on there. Could that be reused as something that the county could use for operations at that facility? Those are all of the questions that we ask going forward. We've looked at additional miscellaneous structures. I know there's a lift station there on site. We've got, that is a county lift station. We've got the outbuilding, which is the restroom building out on the property. We'll be able to look at that and analyze that in greater detail as we go forward to see whether or not it can be reused for a park purpose. And then it was really going on to, and there'll be a series of slides of the property, looking at the different locations throughout the property, understanding the topography. You've got on the east side of the property, there's got some real marshy fairways, if you will. And then we've got some high-end dry places as well that we looked at, all of which will be inventoried as we move ahead so that we can do an analysis of not just what can stay, but what can be either done around it and revegetated naturally for maybe ecological restoration or reforestation as we go through this. We look at everything from the drainage ditches that are out there to the small bridges to what I'll call in-between spaces between the golf holes where the property itself kind of makes a jog either to the left or the right. Those become real interesting spaces that you can design as a park as you continue to move forward. We looked at obviously the very long fairways that we've got, and very similar to what we see out at Rolling Hills. Rolling Hills is all linear spaces. So luckily in this particular case, we have some difference going on. So we've got some interesting little areas between the holes as we go through them. Places that happen on the edge of the property are going to be very, very, we're going to have to pay very special attention to those as we continue forward. No matter what it is we do on the property, we want to make sure that we are being very cognizant of, if you live on the golf course, of your ability to either be buffered by the potential activity that's going to happen there, or at least to preserve positive views that happen. So we want to make sure that we're documenting all of that as we move forward. And certainly last but not least, we want to be able to document what do we have there in terms of the natural environment. It's not just a series of some lakes and some trees. We have both, as you saw in the aerial, the remnants of a former wetland system that's still on site that handles stormwater. And we have opportunities, just like we had at Rolling Hills, to enhance that going forward. And those are all the things that we'll be looking at as we continue on. So, we've got now, we're going to move towards looking at this from the sky. So now we're looking straight down at the country club. Just as we go forward with these maps, I wanted to give you some landmarks. You see Eagle Circle wrapping around the perimeter of the golf course, Sterling Park Elementary School, which is on the lower side of the aerial. Red Bug Lake is off to the lower right, and then Dewdrop Pool is off to the upper left. So we're going to hold this view as we go through some of these potential ideas of what we've looked at, of what could be here going forward. So to give you the lay of the land, as we look at, I've produced a kind of a pulled back version of this to give you an idea of the golf layout itself. We'll try that as we continue forward with this, we will spend less time talking about the individual golf hole and more time talking about what could be there. But for now, this is how everybody knows the property. You know it by the hole that you live off of, or the hole that you access all the time. So here's the lay of the land with all of that. We've highlighted a couple of things for you. The yellow boundary is the property that we're looking at, about 135 acres or so. Of that, based on our current calculations, about 53 of that is water. Very different from Rolling Hills, where we only had 8 acres of water. So a lot of wetland systems to deal with on this property, and really as an amenity and something to look at as an advantage in this case. In red are right in the center of the clubhouse building, approximately 5,200 square feet. And then we've got the maintenance area and so forth. A couple of things to note as well. We have highlighted the leased space right next to the Sterling Park Park. That's something that we'll need to look at going forward about how any kind of relationship would happen with that property. We understand that the golf clubhouse has leased that area from the HOA for the operation of the golf course. And again, that will be something that we deal with going forward. So as the next slide advances, we now overlaid the FEMA 100-year flood line as we go forward. And this, again, probably looks a lot similar to what you saw from the 1940 aerial, where on the east side of the property, all of that was wetland. Well, FEMA looks at the topography elevation. So in this case, elevation 69. What this also does is it also points gives us the goal that as we develop this, even as a park, there are certain things that we're going to need to do that you have to pay attention to in construction within the floodplain. So we're going to be very cognizant as we go forward about locating types of amenities and the different requirements that will be on the county in order to go ahead and construct anything in those areas. But again, it also points its way towards an opportunity to where we can look at the east side of the property as a real wetland restoration and stormwater improvement area, at least an opportunity to do so. So very similar to the way we looked at this property to Rolling Hills, we really need to take this as to out of the gate, once should the board decide to purchase the property from day one, we know we're going to need to maintain the property. But in terms of what it is we could do with the property, almost right out of the gate, we can look at the development of some kind of a trail system. We've looked at the way that the golf course is laid out. We could probably get a 3-mile loop system in on this as we go forward, as well as the opportunity for some pedestrian bridge crossings, picnic areas, nature trails, those kinds of things. We also looked at the community building being something that we address, in this case, right out of the gate, as like I said, as opposed to Rolling Hills. The at least apparent condition of what we've seen is that we've got an opportunity to get that building up and running again for community use, whereas we wouldn't necessarily have had that chance at Rolling Hills. So that's something we're going to want to address. Our feeling is the longer that building stays closed, the harder it is to bring it back into operation without spending more money. So we're going to want to address that right up front. The other part of this will be, how do we approach this from stormwater improvements for not just the neighborhood, but for the entire property? So our watershed folks within the county are already looking this in terms of working with the St. John's Water Management District, River Water Management District, looking at the opportunity for some kind of a stormwater treatment system. And what I mean by that is a filtration system to help work with the natural systems on site to help filter out some of the nutrients that naturally drain into this basin, and then eventually the water makes its way all the way to Lake Jessup as it goes through the system. So those were factors that we'll be looking at as we proceed forward, and those will be opportunities that we look at doing pretty much right out of the gate. So while I'm waiting for the slide to advance, and I'm taking a sip of water, excuse me. The sketch you see on your screen is how at least one way this could work. And again, the reason why it says preliminary draft on the screen is this is exactly that. This is our first look at this. As we proceed forward with the project and as we continue to do our due diligence, obviously we're going to learn more details and a lot of things will change. They changed at Rolling Hills, they will change here, but at least you start to get the idea of, should we look at this in terms of at least the first phase being a passive development? How could that potentially lay out? So to give you an idea of what we're looking at, the white dashed line that's on the screen could be the location of where a trail might go. This could follow a lot of the existing cart paths that are out there now. Obviously, when you get into fairways where there are no paths, we'll need to make a new path. But we'll look at maybe knitting those together throughout the site as we continue to develop a viable paved multi-purpose trail system for the neighborhood and for the park. The other thing that you'll see a lot of is the opportunity to maybe expand some of the wetland areas or the existing lake systems and do that in conjunction with wetland plantings so that as we move forward, we're improving the condition of the waterways and improving the health of the waterways, both through natural systems and by regrading and by replanting, and in some cases through some mechanical means. And those are things that we'll be investigating. Again, if you want to take a look at how that works, we did that right out of the gate at Rolling Hills. And with a lot of the existing lakes, we had regraded the banks, we had replanted the banks, and those things are already on their way. So this is how this could lay out as we go forward. And you can see we could pretty much utilize every corner of the property as some sort of passive park. Now, the question will be, and this is one of the things that we'll be asking you on the survey, is there's a lot of other directions to go with the park. The column that you'll see on your screen in the center are other additional passive park type activities. And the reason why we're calling them passive activities is this is how the county would define these types of activities as passive. So a playground, a restroom building, exercise stations. That may seem active, but that kind of goes along with the passive uses of a trail. All the way down to reforested areas, places where we could do some larger plantings, including the possibility of maybe there's some potential for improving the Sterling Park to the north side near that leased area, where we could see some additional amenities there, or at least some crossover in the two types of facilities. The column on your right starts to gravitate more towards active recreation, or the sports world, if you will. Things that from our world in parks require much more intensive maintenance. So whether it's reconditioning a driving range across the lake that's there now, to having gardens, and the reason why gardens show up as active is because of the kind of maintenance that they require, to pickleball courts, to disc golf, all the way down to potential multi-purpose fields. And that's something that we were not able to look at Rolling Hills. Also something that we were not able to necessarily do because, quite honestly, we didn't have the room in Rolling Hills. Regardless, we do not have a budget for any of these at this time. We really don't have a budget for the items on the left-hand part of the screen, but these are sort of a wish list items. These aren't anything that we would program in right away. They may be driven by partnerships and sponsorships, and certainly by community involvement. But the same approach that we use at Rolling Hills regarding these items, which have not been budgeted and which are not being developed right now, can be part of the vision for this place. But these will be part of the conversation as we go forward. So the last graphic that you'll see from sitting in a helicopter looking down on the property says, okay, so we've added all of the passive items that you saw in the other sketch. Now, where would some of those active items be? And right in the center of your screen, the big long rectangle of green, for the most part, that's about the only place on the property where we actually have the room to do something like that. So should that be in our future, that would be the logical landing place for any kind of active multi-purpose fields. Now, what we mean by active multi-purpose fields, it could just be graded and sodded, and we can reline it for whatever needs to be there, meaning that it could be, you could have a soccer practice one day, or you could line it for something else, but it allows us to go ahead and have a flexible space. When it's not being used for that, it's going to look like a large field of green. Beyond that, we would need to expand the existing parking area. If we were to put something like pickleball courts, where would those be? And those land right next to the parking lot near the building. These types of features really gravitate towards where we have already existing access and already existing parking. So we're not carving out new spots or new access points for cars to arrive on the site. And at the same time, the dark green blobs on either side of the light green fields, we know that whatever we did in the middle of the park, we would need to buffer that so that the folks that live on the golf course aren't necessarily looking at that all the time, but that we're being very cognizant of their views across the property. Again, these aren't different ideas that we already didn't look at Rolling Hills. So we've got a little bit of a head start on this, of knowing what we need to do as we look at the existing areas next to people's homes. Now, those aren't the only things that we'll be looking at. I mean, they certainly are going to be the buzzwords of what would you like to see in your park. As we move forward, even through the due diligence phase, we're really going to need to evaluate what is more feasible, demolishing existing structures or rehabbing existing structures. And that's going to take a while to go ahead and determine as we move forward, some of which we even did at Rolling Hills after the property was already purchased. We'll look at the infrastructure on site, as well as any environmental issues, all the way down to trying to get a better handle on construction costs as we move ahead. So once you're able to at least paint a picture of these are the kinds of things that could be on the site that are very indicative of not just what we looked at Rolling Hills, but what could happen on this property. What does it cost? Now, again, this is very early numbers. So we're using these to try to illustrate really the order of magnitude of the numbers we start to look at. The top line, we know that should we move forward with this and we get into the late February, early March, all of the things that we'll need to do for due diligence, we've estimated that to run at about 90,000. Start spending dollars on this to that tune in order to be able to answer all of the questions through due diligence. Now, next box down the line that says property acquisition and environmental remediation. We're listing right now as a $7 million property acquisition. That is part, and you'll see the asterisk there, that's part of the fact that as we've had discussions with the existing property owner, Wekiva Golf Club is also part of a package deal, at least part of the discussion we've had so far. And the total for both of those together is a 14 million. Again, no appraisals have been done. This is based on conversation only. So at least we've got an idea, at least a starting point for the discussion of the Deer Run property. The environmental remediation side, you'll see in a moment, when we got right down into the details, we ended up spending $1.5 million worth of environmental remediation at Rolling Hills. Now, we're not sure whether or not we're going to need them here. The good news on this one is, based upon the fact that the golf course is still fairly young in age, and really started seeing its play in the 80s, Rolling Hills was a golf course that was constructed in the 1920s, and just about a lot of the things that we thought about in the 1950s that we would put on the grass and in the ground, by the time the 80s rolled around, those had been banned and ruled out. And that's really what we've been cleaning up at Rolling Hills. So we're hopeful on the Deer Run side. We also want to make sure we budget for property maintenance out of the ground. We want to make sure from day one that we're maintaining the property. So we've already been able to put some dollars to that, to the tune of about $225,000. So right now we're at about the ballpark of just over 7 million in the bank to be able to at least close on the property. Now, all of those things that we talked about that are possibilities, let's look at the items on the left-hand side of your screen when the screen catches up, about what we were able to figure out at this point. And again, very preliminary numbers. We're really looking at about just over $6 million to do whatever we think the phase one needs to be. And as you see, the bulk of that, or at least a good piece of that, is in stormwater improvements. We've got, again, the opportunity there to have much more meaningful stormwater improvements here on this property, especially with over 50 acres of water. We also were able to price at least in comparable numbers to what we did at Rolling Hills, and we're right around the same number. So it's not too different from what we're looking at right now with the Rolling Hills property. Now, all of the things in the big box off to the right-hand side of your screen, those probably start somewhere at about $5.5 million on up, as we continue to look at all the different parts and the different pieces that we could develop here. Again, all of those would be something to look at in the future, under future budgets and future opportunities, but they would all be driven by partnerships and working with the community as we would go forward. So this starts to paint a picture of at least the order of magnitude as we look ahead on the property of what this could be. Now, I talked about the comparison with Rolling Hills, and this gets into all kinds of problems. I can almost see Joe right now in the look on his face. The Rolling Hills number, those are verifiable numbers. We've gone through that process. We know what we spent as we went through due diligence. The bulk of our due diligence cost on Rolling Hills was in environmental and remediation and all the analysis that had to be done. You see the Rolling Hills acquisition was just about $4 million. Next line is the $1.5 million for the environmental remediation, as well as the maintenance on the property, and the $4 million budget that we have right now to start to develop the trail system, and that will start looking at development later on this year. So at about a $9.7 million investment that the county has made in looking at the property through development of phase one. The note on the 1.5 million, and we'll talk about this in a moment, is the neighbors around the golf course voted to create a MSBU, a municipal service benefit unit, to basically pay for the environmental remediation themselves. So that $1.5 million helped offset the development of the property and really offset the cost of the environmental remediation. But it really helped push us across the finish line in terms of what the county was able to do with that property. So what we tried to envision was, how do we possibly compare Deer Run at this very early stage to this other mark, this Rolling Hills experience that we had? And as you see, as you work your way down with the unknown open for environmental remediation, and that's something we'll get a much better handle on over the next 4 months or so, where we fall in at that level, down about 13.5 million. Again, we're not too far out of bounds, but it is substantially larger. Now, the last piece of that is, what was the impact of the neighborhood forming an MSBU on the overall project? And essentially, out of that 9.7 million, the neighborhood paid for just over 15% of the cost. That was directly tied to the fact that of all the folks that would see benefits out of the development of a park, it was going to be by the folks right there in the neighborhood, both from folks that were on the property as well as within walking distance of the property. And we're able to work that through the MSBU. Now, if we were to compare that to this scenario with these costs at Deer Run, the equivalent falls at about $2 million. Again, not too far outside the bounds of what we were looking at before, but again, very, very preliminary numbers as we move forward. So what is it that we're asking you to do tonight and over the next few weeks? And what is it that you can help us out with probably the most going forward as we go through this process in detail? The first part is understanding that we've had conversations about the Municipal Services Benefit Unit and what that allows us to do in being able to contribute to the overall development of the property. And in this case, you'll see a map of Rolling Hills appear. This was a map that was developed working with our steering committee, and we started forming a steering committee here for Deer Run to help advise us of, let's look at each individual property owner, and these are all residential properties that are highlighted in either purple or yellow, of everyone that's within a half-mile walking distance of the property. And we'll get into some of that as we go forward with discussions about what an MSBU is all about and how we come up with those numbers. But basically what this allowed us to do is work with the neighborhood in setting up certain thresholds. And we're able to set up a range of, depending on the investment that was made by the neighborhood or the cost of the remediation, of different ways and different levels at which that would be paid back. Basically what happened at Rolling Hills is that if you were in the purple category or category A, that was someone who was right on the golf course. So they saw a significant higher value or valuation of their property values by being on the golf course than those that were not. So we're able to structure the MSBU to accommodate that and to be a fair delineation in how that would work. Obviously, we've got a lot of work to do in this regard with the Deer Run property, but it'd be something that we'll be looking at going forward. The bottom line on an MSBU is this is not something that the county will just do. This is something that really relies on you and everyone who's on this call and everyone who will participate in this process. The picture on your screen is a meeting that we had at Lyman High School. This was the cafeteria, and it was standing room only across the back. And this was the discussion we had about the MSBU. This very much relies on you and your neighbors to rally the support for this project, because in the county's program, you need to establish 65% passing grade of folks that want to see an MSBU happen. Now, the numbers that you see here is that Rolling Hills actually achieved 75.5% yes. Now, the way that the votes count and the way the votes work, if you don't return your ballot, and this is just mail-in, it's not, you don't go to a polling place, it's just fill out your form, you get one per household and you get one vote per household. Anyone that's not returned is a no vote. So folks literally were going door to door to make sure that their neighbors at least voted. And in this case, the second number, 95.6% out on the right, of all of the ballots returned, that's the percentage of folks that voted yes on the ballot. So clearly this was a overwhelming victory for the neighbors, and they were able to contribute to the project in that way. Now, what I'm now going to put on the screen is at least the first step at trying to put a map together, very similar to Rolling Hills, so that we can, again, move forward in this process, if this whole process moves forward, and making sure we can at least map the entire community, map all the HOAs, and then start having this discussion about who's against the golf course, who's against property-wise, who's internal to the neighborhoods, and then how do we determine going forward how that would work. All of that is to be determined, but again, the bottom line is it's going to take a lot of work by folks on the ground to make this happen. So, going back to our master schedule, again, we're right up at the front. We'll be coming back to the Board of County Commissioners to give them an update on February the 23rd. And if we continue on with the project, that's where all the discussion will happen, including the MSBU discussion, and we'll get into that in more detail. But the bottom line going forward tonight is two things. Number one is starting probably tomorrow morning, I would say tonight, but if you check right now, I'm not sure it's active. We've got a SurveyMonkey link on the screen. I know it's kind of cryptic, but they come up with that. We don't get to pick the address. But basically until February 22nd, this is not scientific, but we're going to ask you three things. One is, are you a resident of the golf course, golf club property? Excuse me, Deer Run. Number two is, are you at least interested in having discussions about the MSBU and about what it means? And that's a whole different process, like I said, but we wanted to gauge your temperature in the room, so to speak, of the willingness of folks to get involved in that way. And the last thing that you'll see on there, the third question, is all of the things that we put out on the screen tonight about what could be there in the park, whether it's something that we could do soon or something that we do maybe down the line and it's a dream. We ask you what you feel about those, and we give you the ability that if there's something that's not on the list, you can put that on the list. Basically, what we'd like you to do, and to spread the word with your neighbors, is if you can all participate in the survey, we'll start to see how many responses we get back. We'd love to be able to give an update to the Board of County Commissioners at the end of this month about, generally speaking, what's the feeling of the folks in the room. Secondly, if we're not able to get to your question tonight, this is not the end of the world or the end of the opportunity for you to ask questions. We've got two different email addresses on the screen. One is Sherry Williams. Some of you have heard from her already. And then the other one is my email address. Please feel free. Send us your emails. We will take all of the emails and we will combine them into one record so that we can submit those to the board as well. In addition to that, we want to make sure that we're able to continue to send this out via email. So we'll send out a Nextdoor post starting tomorrow of sending this link out. The folks that we're working with on the steering committee, they'll be able to send this link out as well. Feel free, like I said, to share this with your neighbors and your friends there in the community. We'd love to hear from you going forward. So with that, that's the end of the formal presentation, and I'm going to turn this back over to Joe.
Wow, that was a lot of information, huh? Rick, I don't know whether you can hear that, but they're applauding you here. And I'm sure they're applauding you at home too on Zoom.
I'm sorry I couldn't hear it, but that's okay. I appreciate it. I can feel the warmth.
So as you see, a lot of dreams. Rick and I actually get a kick out of this stuff, much to the chagrin of the county manager sometime and to the scare of the county commissioners. So I've been in I was in Parks and Recreation for 32 years. Rick is a planner by nature and a leisure service director by trade now. So we eat this stuff up. We sit down and we look at a piece of property and say, ooh, it's Christmas morning. Everything that we showed you tonight is just that, a Christmas morning dream. This is things that could happen on this property. Nothing happens on this property until the commission decides whether or not they even want to buy it. And community input. I made a promise to the communities when I worked back in '86, I started. And I learned right away that there are staff sometimes who wants to tell you what you need. and then there are staff who wants to listen. And I made a deal with myself and with every community I've ever dealt with, ever worked with. This is not my park. This is your park. If it becomes a park, you will have input on what goes into this park. It's not Joe Abel's park. It's not Rick Durr's park. So we're going to work together collaboratively with the neighborhood and the commission on what this would be if this is to become a park. A lot of work. You saw the list. A lot of work to be done in order for us to even get this to the commission for consideration. But what we're asking you to do the next 2 weeks is give us feedback, give us input, because our goal is either the 23rd, I think was the date, or the first meeting in March. Our goal is to take information back to the commission so that they can say, let's keep moving this forward, due diligence, or you know what, this scares us, we're not interested. Or you've said, nah, we don't want to pursue this. You know what? You scared us. We're not interested in this. So it's real important for you to, at this point, if you have not been engaged, you need to get engaged. I like to call it getting committed. Like you need to get committed. Regardless of which side you're on, you need to get committed to this conversation. If the conversation moves forward, then I'm going to want you to get committed to what it looks like. But at this point, you got to get committed. What I'd like to try to do is take some questions. Now, we've got 386 people that are watching this at home or hearing this at home, and we've got over 100 people in here. I can't answer all the questions. That's why the survey is important. It gives you an opportunity to give us your comments. We will hit and record every comment. We will get all the feedback and have that compiled for the commissioners and for us to be able to make decisions and recommendations moving forward. So your voice will be heard. Maybe not tonight, but it will be heard. So what I'd like to do in a short period of time, yes, sir. Okay, so the question is, explain a little bit more about the MSBU process. So the MSBU is basically where you would vote among your community to tax yourself with the commission's approval for development or improvements to this property if we to move that direction. So what we tried to show you was a real high level of comparison between what we did at Rolling Hills for the remediation and what that would look like in a scenario if we were to ask you at 15.3% at the preliminary estimate. Those numbers are all guesstimates, I like to call them. Instead of estimates, I like to call them guesstimates because it's really our best guess based on our experiences, based on what we think it would cost moving forward. So what would happen is that number, I'm going to try to remember, $13.4 million in that first part of what it would look like if we were going to take on Deer Run. We would look at this neighborhood, this community, and we would say, where's the value and the diminishing value the further away you are from the golf course. Here's what we know. And this is not me knowing, this is not Rick knowing, this is in the profession, a well-maintained park. We don't have anything but that in Seminole County. A well-maintained park increases the value of your home the closer you are to that park, to the tune of it as much as 15 to 20% if you live on the golf course. I'll give you one better. I said that to the people in Rolling Hills and some questioned me. I was all right with that. I've been around long enough. I've been questioned a lot. I talked to Dr. John Crompton at Texas A&M. There's nobody that knows more about economic value of a park, economic impact of a park than John Crompton. Guy's older than dirt, been doing this for forever. That's what he does. He teaches classes at Texas A&M. If you call up anybody that's in the profession and say, who do I call to ask this question? They're going to say John Crompton. I talked to John Crompton on the phone. I said, John, I'm getting a lot of slack here. Can you confirm for me? Joe, about 15, 20%. If they're living on the property and you're maintaining the property well. Here's a kicker. When we bought Rolling Hills, there were some people who put their houses on the market. Guess what happened? Those who sold on the golf course after we took it over was getting 15 to 20% more than what they were when it was sitting there being neglected. We didn't make those numbers up, folks. Those are real numbers. So what we look at is, what is a walking distance to a park of this magnitude? We say about a quarter to a half mile, and then we diminish that value the further you get away. But there's still a value. If you're in walking distance, 5 minutes to a park, there's a value. And there's a value to your property of that. So what the MSBU does is says, if I live right on a property, here's the value. If I live off the property, here's the value. That value is based on two things. MSBU is a determined amount of money that we would look at to ask the community for. Again, if we were at 15.3%, right now with the guesstimate numbers that we have, it's around 2 million, a little over $2 million. The nice thing that you guys have as an advantage is if you want to go the MSBU route, is there's a whole lot more of you than there was at Rolling Hills. I mean, a whole lot more. So when you looked at those numbers, $195 a year or $85 a year based on whether you were in the A or B, Rick and I did some quick math. Again, don't hold me to these numbers, but we think your numbers are going to be significantly less based on that scenario. Why an MSBU, and why are we even having a conversation? Why would you want to pay? You're already paying taxes. You pay taxes in Seminole County. Seminole County is supposed to take care of all your park needs. And you're right. And we do. I use the MSB unit, or the MSBU conversation, the same as I do tennis. So if you go to Red Bug Lake Park, we ask you to pay for tennis. The reason we ask you to pay to play tennis is because that's a benefit to you. It's not a benefit to your mom. And your mom shouldn't have to pay for a service enhancement that she doesn't benefit from. So if she doesn't play tennis, while the expectation of her tax dollars should help pay for the maintenance and the existence of that recreational opportunity within the community, she shouldn't pay for your use, specific to your use of that. So the MSBU, in my opinion, says that you have an advantage because we've got a regional park, a community park here that's in your yard, that's literally in your backyard, or that's right down the street. And let's face it, this is one of those where in our master plan and in our comp plan for the county, we have not defined a need for this much additional parkland at this time. So we look at things as a need, a want, a desire. We don't need as a county to buy this property. We're interested in this property because the community is interested in this property as a park as opposed to development. And because we're responsive to your desires, your needs, your wants, and your community involvement and engagement, that's why we're going through this process. We want to see if it's feasible. We want to see if it makes sense. Listen, me, 32-year veteran of parks, I want it. Not gonna lie to you. I'm selfish that way. Don't get excited. I don't have a vote. Not only do I not have a vote, but these guys are gonna pick apart any argument that I bring back to them in support of it to make sure that I've done my due diligence. So don't get excited when I say I like it. So that's a little bit about the MSBU. Let's just open up. Are there questions about MSBU? We'll start with that and see where we can go from there. Let's start right here. Oh, that's a good question, and I should have addressed that. So the question was, is this a flat fee that's assessed to your taxes forever? Or is this something that is structured differently? So MSBUs are set up based on a defined period of time. So Rolling Hills was 15 years, I believe. So at the end of so what we did is we said, okay, here's the dollar amount cost. Here's what it costs us to deliver this service. And here's the number of people or homes, properties that are involved in this at these levels. There's a whole formula that we go through, and we base it on 10, 12, 15, 20 years, depending on what the desire is. Typically, I like to go at 10, no more than 15 years, because it's a reasonable amount of time, and usually it's a reasonable amount of money. So for 15 years, we'll use that number. Whatever that number is, that would be your annual valuation for taxes for the MSBU annually with your taxes, that dollar amount for the 15 years. Now, the nice thing about the MSBU is when it gets low enough, like the $85 at Rolling Hills, about every 2 or 3 months now, since we started collecting that, and we don't collect that until that particular project is completed, and that money is spent on that particular part of the project. Once we started collecting money last year, about every couple months, we will have people who will say, hey, I don't want to pay the $85 a month or $85 a year. I'm just going to pay it all and be done with it. So they write us a check for whatever the amount is. They save a little bit of the interest cost of that over that time period. So they get a little bit of a discount and they're done. They've paid their assessment. They're ready to go. They're done. No more to have to worry about it. So hope that answered your question.
Hey, Joe.
Okay. Yes.
The disembodied voice here. Very quickly, we've been looking as well on the online chat, and just to hit a couple of those questions, there were some questions about the MSBU, but a general announcement is that, yes, we will be making this presentation available to anybody who wants it as a download off our website. It'll probably be there tomorrow. We'll put the links up, as well as emailed links to both the SurveyMonkey as well. So we'll keep pushing that information out. And again, yes, you'll be able to get a copy of this presentation so you can look at it. If you have any other questions, you can ask those and refer to the presentation.
Rick, I meant to ask you this before we started the conversation this evening. I should have asked you offline, but too bad, too late. Are we going to have a specific landing page right now for Deer Run, like we did for Rolling Hills, so that we can have a specific location that they can go to for these conversations, so that they don't have to search the website, they don't have to search a bunch of different places, they can go straight to whatever it is, our home site, and then go straight from there to Deer Run?
Yes, the short answer is yes. We will have a Deer Run project page where we'll have the links available, presentations available for download, as well as this continues forward, we'll be able to share information for folks to be able to download there as well.
Beautiful. All right, your follow-up question. Well, if we do something there, somebody's got to pay for it. Would there be an increase in taxes? We've been very good, and I say we, trying to take credit for the commissionership. The commissioners have been very good about holding your taxes. Your tax increases, as you know them, are based on the value of your home increase, not because they've increased the taxes each year. So would there be an increase? There's a cost associated to this. So somewhere we have to find that money. Now, do we juggle it within our existing budget? As much as we can. But yeah, you can expect an increase countywide, but that would be based on the opportunity that this is a community park countywide. So that number across 475,000 people, 200 and some thousand homes, is much less significant across all the homes. Another question. So the question is there was a $7 million number with an asterisk, and it was for the golf course and something else. What was the something else? So the $7 million is a number that we're working off of just to try to make sense of the numbers from an estimate perspective. So what has happened is when we sat down and talked with the owners of the property, they own both Deer Run and Wekiva. They don't want to sell one, they want to sell both. And if they sell both of them to us, their asking price at this moment is $14 million for the two golf courses. The $7 million, all we did was just split it in half because we had to come up with some estimate numbers of what the value would be based on what we thought would happen moving forward. So when we do the appraisals, we'll have to look at that number and see, does the 14 million make sense? And then we'll have to go back and have conversations. So the 14 million was a number out of the gate that when I sat down and talked with the owners, I said, listen, we would like to, our commission would like us to do our due diligence on whether or not we're interested. They said, we're interested in selling both of them. We're interested in selling them at $14 million, and we'll hold the development in abeyance until you have a chance to do your due diligence. That's where we are. That's as far as the conversation went. But we had to have a number to come out of the gate with so that we could start putting together what we thought the cost would be. So at the end of the day, if we end up buying both golf courses and we do the appraisals, one may come in higher, one may come in lower. The uses of one versus the uses of the other may be different and may drive that cost. So there's still conversation. We haven't even had that conversation yet. Yes, sir.
Government acquire the property with eminent domain.
So let me tell you a little thing about eminent domain. Parks back in the early 60s, 70s, some even in the 50s, 70s and 80s, it was a thing. Eminent domain is not easy. Eminent domain, you have to prove the necessity for that before you can even entertain eminent domain. So let me tell you where we are. We don't have an eminent domain situation here. We don't have a comp plan. We don't have a master plan. We don't have any plan that says we need this much acreage in Seminole County at this moment that would qualify us for eminent domain. Yes, sir.
What I'm proposing is that the front 9, which is the high and dry, you keep it as 9, improve it. And I have numbers from the city of Winter Park. They did the same thing. People are not the 18-hole courses have gone out of business across the country because people are not wanting to dedicate 4 to 5 to 6 hours that it would take to drive. 9-hole courses are now everywhere. Numbers in Winter Park in 2015 and before have improved dramatically. One thing, 2015 they did $408,000 in revenue. In 2020, after they rehab the course, they spent $1.5 million to do that. The revenue is $850,000, and that's every year. So none of that has been thought of. And everything looks great as far as being parked. And when park and a course will generate revenue and eventually pay for the park.
So everybody's always in favor of that. Everybody's always in favor of that. So I managed and operated 2 golf courses, an 18-hole golf course and a 9-hole golf course. My brother actually owns a 9-hole golf course in West Virginia. I don't want to say that Winter Park's giving you bad information, but here's what I know. You're right. They probably did those numbers. They had a $1.5 million investment outside of their regular investment on an annual basis. So these people who do these golf course renovations, they sell the idea that I did it for $1.5 million, I did it for $2 million, I did it for $3 million, whatever the number is. What they don't tell you is that's good now. That's good for a year. And they had an operating golf course to renovate as opposed to one that's been set empty, not used. Give you some numbers. For each one of the greens complexes for 9 holes is approximately $100,000 to $150,000 to renovate, to do it right. Tee boxes, depending on how many you do, could be anywhere from 20 to 100,000. It's not cheap. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm not saying we won't even consider it. I'm just saying that our intention is not to get in the golf course business at Deer Run, unless the commissioners tell me to run those numbers, and I'll certainly run those numbers. But I can tell you, my brother, I have told him that the only reason he keeps that golf course is because it's a tax write-off for him, and he won't argue me that point. But it's hard to make money in a golf course. I did it on an 18-hole golf course, but I was in South Florida and it was the Biltmore. My 9-hole golf course was a loser, and I was lucky enough to carry it on my 18-hole golf course. And I'm not saying golf courses are bad. I'm not saying that we don't want to get in the golf course business. I'm just saying that we have not been asked to look at golf course option by the commission yet, but it's always an option. And listen, I'm not arguing those numbers, but I'm going to tell you this: if you really want to look at the numbers, you go back from 20 to 10. You look at all of their actual costs for operation and maintenance and capital, all 3 costs, over a 10-year period versus their revenue, and I'll bet you a lunch that they have not made a penny in the black. Good deal. All right, somebody over here had a hand up. Go ahead. Yeah. I do not know that number off the top of my head. That will be part of the consideration, obviously, when we talk about. But listen, let me explain something. I bought my house a few years ago for a dollar amount, and I'm telling you right now, I wouldn't sell it for anything close to that dollar amount today. So there's a value to property that doesn't mean because I got a great deal, I'm giving you a great deal. Our responsibility is to be reasonable. And if they give us a reasonable request, then we can negotiate that reasonable request, but we can't expect them to take a loss or to diminish their opportunity based on our desire to have a better price. And so, I don't mean to say that in a negative, nasty way, but I just want you to understand that there's the value I think, there's the value you think, there's the value they paid for it, there's the value that it really is. And we have to figure out what that is that we're comfortable with. Yes, ma'am.
Hey, Joe, we couldn't hear the question.
Oh, the question was, do we know how much they paid, the current owners paid for the golf course, and what the real value is? So, okay, there we got a number, 1.2. Listen, everything's negotiable in life. I mean, everything. I said this was their asking price. We haven't dickered over the price. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that we're not going to, because it's not my nature not to. And I tell you, these 2 guys up here don't have the ability not to. So 7 million, 14 million is a number that started. And that's where we are today. We haven't even started. Listen, we're not sure we even want to buy this property. So I'm not going to have a negotiation with him until I'm interested in the property. Yes, ma'am. Ooh.
I am.
There we go. Okay. Third question.
Why do you ask that?
Because you have a vested interest in having a golf course instead of a park. To you, have you done a survey on?
We have not. But what we're hoping for is, as we ask you for information and feedback, this gentleman is a perfect example. Now, when he fills out this survey, I fully expect him to ask us to explore the possibility of a 9-hole golf course on the front 9, the back 9, the middle 9, whatever. And that will be on our radar. Anybody else that wants to talk about a golf course, put that in your comments and it'll be on our radar for further conversation with the board. I'm going to get my butt kicked for saying that from both of these guys before I get out the back door. But I just want you to know that that's the way this works is, listen, it's just like I wouldn't go in. Matter of fact, I wish I had that picture, because one day we were sitting in my office and we were looking at one of the preliminary designs, and there's that long run up where the park is from the city of Castleberry on the backside. There's a long stream that goes up through there. And I made a comment that I was told not to ever repeat again, but I'm going to give you an example of how crazy stuff can get. I said, you know how cool it would be is if you just widened that piece of water all the way up through here and did some of those things where you put rapids in and let people come in and do canoes and kayaks and ride the rapids, or put their ski boards on and could stand there in one place, and you would have these hydraulic things within the water. So during the day, normally it would look like a regular water feature, but then you could go out there and turn this thing on and it would be like a wave pool almost. So that got shot down pretty quick. Yeah, let's go here. Deeply, because the alternative is the developer buys the property and they put 250 more houses into your run, and it's going to jam up all the roads. You can't get out of there in the morning now to go to work. I'm retired, thank God, finally. But there's only 3 exits. Go out either Red Bug Road, you go out the Eagle Circle, that way on the Red Bug Road. Go out the back way through Dodge, or you go out on Lake. They put 250 more houses in there. Figure 70% of those are going to be 2-car families. That's not traffic. They can't take it. Okay, listen, I thank you for your comments. I'm going to say this as politely as I can. I'm not looking for comments. I'm looking for questions. Comments are going to be on the survey. All right. We're going to listen to those comments. We're going to take those comments. But I just want you to know that tonight we want to try to cover as many questions as we can because we're running out of time. Yes, sir.
Looking at the presentation, it shows contingent on time. That's part of this.
We don't know that. I'm going to stop you right there before we get too far down. So the offer from the owners to the county to consider this, because they were asked for us to have an opportunity to do our due diligence to explore this. Their offer at the table, initial, has been 14 million. If we're selling one, we want to sell them both. We want to get out of this conversation. 14 million, and you can have them both. We have not had any discussion as, are you interested in just one of them and not the other? What's the real price? What can I get it for? What's the red tag sale price? None of that. We haven't done any of that conversation. I sit down and said, I've got to have a starting point. You give me a number. If you'll agree to give me 6 months, then we'll come back. And if we're going to talk about moving forward, then we'll talk about a price.
Same thing for Wekiva.
Not at this point. I figured I have enough energy for one at a time. Let's get somebody else. We don't know that yet. So the map that Rick showed, the question, Rick, was how many homes are being used for calculating the MSBU. So he showed a map of what could be. And all we did was take a preliminary half-mile away from the actual golf course as best we could and to start getting an idea. There's a lot more work that's going to go into where the addresses are, what the number is, and all of that information. So right now, we literally are in the preliminary stages. Rick, his staff, and I literally have put this presentation together within the last 6 weeks. And a lot of it is just guesstimates, conjecture, what could be, what might be, and we've got a long way to go. As you saw on his map or his timeline, after tonight and the feedback that you give us over the next couple of weeks, and we go back to the commission with your comments and feedback that says, yeah, you're interested, or hey, listen, majority of the community really not interested, then they'll give us direction to keep moving ahead full steam. And then by June, we will have all those answers. We'll know what the MSBU will look like. We know how many homes it should be. We know what we think the cost is going to be. We know what remediation efforts are going to be. So we'll know all of those as we move through this process. Yes, sir. Whitebeard. You are correct. What we're trying to do is to look at the actual value increase to the homes in close proximity. And Dr. John Crompton, there's a doctor at Penn State, who both argue that once you get outside that quarter of a mile, you really don't have a legitimate argument. Now, what we are trying to do here is, because you guys have a much better structure than what Rolling Hills did. Rolling Hills did not have a homeowners association. You guys have 20, almost 30. And what we're looking at is, how do we engage the homeowners association? So Rick had mentioned earlier about a steering committee. We've contacted the homeowners associations. We're going to have representation from those. So if you know your homeowners association and you know your board, reach out to them. We're going to be meeting with them on a regular basis, sharing information with them, and keeping them informed as we have information moving forward. I'm going to have 2 more questions. The man in a white beard right back there, please. No. But I will tell you this. I don't know of a single MSBU that we have done in this county. I've been here for, it'll be 14 years in June, that we've done anything like that. The MSBUs typically run their course. Once we make a commitment, listen, we make a commitment from the commission based on your commitment. We're going to send out a ballot. 65% of the homeowners have to approve this MSBU before it even goes back to commission for consideration. So remember earlier when I talked about commitment? There's a commitment from this community on the MSBU. And in the 14 years I've been here, the commissioners take that commitment seriously. And if they create an MSBU for you, they stay with that MSBU. And I can tell you, I know this commission, they're not spending any money on this property with the intent of selling it. We haven't done that with any park since I've been here, other than the Jetta Point Park. And that was community driven, that they didn't want what was there, and we moved it to another location. That was a benefit to the communities.
Hey, Joe,
Yes, sir. A voice from above.
let me interrupt for 1 second. So a lot of questions on the MSBU process, and just to let you all know, while that's a portion of this process, we will have an MSBU meeting all by itself just to talk about the MSBU. So yeah, we're at the beginning of the stage. There will be its own process that runs the course. One of the things that we're seeing from the folks online asking questions, as well as we've already started receiving emails in, are questions about the park. Specifically, because quite honestly, when it's all said and done, if this becomes real, the park is going to be the thing that you're going to see. That's going to be the thing that you're going to use, and that'll be the thing that drives your property values as well. So if you've got questions about the park, about any of the elements involved with it, about the future of those elements and your thoughts on that, make sure you fill out that survey and make sure you send in those questions as well, so that we can round that out. All of the technical details about the cost and all of those kinds of things, trust me, they'll be part of this process, and so will you. But we really need to get your ideas on the park itself, because we want to make sure that we've captured all of that going forward, because it really could be a lot of different things in there. So just wanted to jump in there and let the folks know that have been sending in chats and sending in emails. A lot of them are asking questions about the park.
And just to
as well.
kind of
So just wanted
further,
to let you know that.
further put it into perspective, what Rick said. So we had, I don't know, a handful, half dozen meetings with the steering committee on Rolling Hills. We had probably a half a dozen, 4 to 6 community meetings. And you saw the one picture he took. There was over 500 people there that night. So, but for COVID, we would have had 500 people here tonight and standing room along the back. There's interest in this conversation, but I want you to understand your level of engagement, your level of commitment from here on is going to make a big difference in how these two gentlemen and their colleagues respond moving forward. That's going to be important. Yes, ma'am. I'm going to take you as the last question. I think we snuck a little area in there for dog park, but don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody. You look at it when you get home. And listen, let me tell you, I would love nothing more than to have a golf course there, if that was the right thing to be there. I enjoyed managing the golf courses I had down south. They were my biggest challenge. We'll use that word. But I enjoyed having them, and we were there. I was there in the heyday. Tiger Woods, thank him every day for the success that we had. I'm just saying that we've got to look at what the community value is, the greatest use for the greatest number of people, and how that reflects this opportunity moving forward. So I'm going to leave you with this. Oops. Rick, put the last page up, please. Get a picture of that information.
That one?
Yes, sir. Get a picture of that information. Use that information. I'm not sure why Rick gave you his email, because everybody's going to want to email Rick, and I don't know that he has enough hours in a day to do all that. The other thing I'm going to offer, and I have 2 of them in the room, just another reason for them to kick me around on their way out. But you should reach out to your commissioners. Let them know what you're thinking. Let them know how you feel. Let them know your passion, your commitment, and your interest in what happens to this property. These 2 guys are here, and I think I got at least one, if not all 3 of the other ones, on Zoom listening to this meeting tonight. They're interested in what you have to say. They're interested in your level of commitment to this effort. Don't miss that opportunity. Use this information, reach out to your commissioners. If we're not getting the information to you, that's okay. Let us know. Give us a call or give us an email. Say, hey, listen, we'd like more information. I'd love to be able to stay here all night and answer all your questions. As you can see, that at one point there were a bunch of hands raised. If I open that up to Zoom, I'd be here next week answering questions. Use the Survey Monkey. If the Survey Monkey doesn't give you the satisfaction that you think you need for comments, directly email one of these two. Email your commissioners. They'll send all that stuff to Rick and I. We will look at everything. We will take everything into consideration as we move through this process. I can't overemphasize this, and I know I've said it half a dozen times. Your level of commitment will determine the decision that the board members make. I want to thank you guys for coming out. I want to thank all of you that are on Zoom. Hopefully we were a help tonight. There will be more conversation moving forward. And again, I can't tell you how much we appreciate the level of involvement and engagement at our community meetings here in Seminole County. It's a pleasure to serve you all, and we thank you for coming out and participating.